There is a method to our Methodism. You know, you may have come to this church via another church. Maybe you used to attend a different church and something that happened there or something that was said there or taught there you disagree with, so you made your way here. And that's okay. I'm grateful that you are here, but I hope that you stay because you appreciate who we are and what we teach and how we do life with Jesus together. You know, Methodism has a rich history that I've tried to interweave throughout this sermon series at the beginning of the year. It's got a rich history, but Methodism has historically always had a very practical approach to our spiritual lives. In fact, John Wesley was a practical theologian. He didn't get super heady. He wasn't concerned with the intellectualism of it, although there was definitely part of that. He was a brilliant man. He was concerned with the everyday person's walk with Jesus and wanted to preach in such a way that it encouraged everybody to take a step closer to Christ. And so he had a practical approach to our spiritual life he called the general rules of the church. There were 3 things that he believed that you could live out that would make your relationship with Jesus and with other people so much better. The 3 things are these: do all the good you can, do no harm, and stay in love with God. Friends, that's as simple as it gets, but if you can do that, you can change your life and a whole lot of other people too. So do all the good you can. It means don't phone it in. Don't just do part of the good that you know you can do for other people. Like, do all the good that you can. Last week we talked about how our faith in Jesus isn't meant to just be personal and kept to ourselves. Our faith in Jesus is meant to be lived out with other people. In fact, I said last week, and I think this is incredibly biblical, that if your faith in Jesus isn't benefiting other people, then it's not really benefiting you. It's an us and God and an us and other people relationship. So do all the good you can for others. But then Wesley said, do no harm. And that is a great way to approach the decisions that you make. It's a great way to approach the life that you live, asking yourself the question, is what I'm doing causing harm to other people? So in one of my previous churches, there was a church member who was a local politician, a well-known local politician. And in the process of his job, he had created some significant political enemies who were trying to oust him from his position. And he had weathered several political storms before I got there, but my first year at this church, there was a scandal that arose. A woman came forward with text messages and pictures of her interaction with him and went to the media and said, look at the affair that he and I have been having, much to the chagrin of his wife and to the people who were buying the newspapers. There was great outcries for him to resign. The trouble was he didn't do it. This was before it was common to clone somebody's Facebook account. Now it happens all the time. I get requests from people all the time, from church members I'm already friends with, and then they message me and go, please don't answer that. I've gotten hacked. That's a common occurrence now. Back then, nobody heard of that happening. And they got his profile picture and all of these text messages, and I'm sitting in his office, him and his wife, and he's distraught and she's upset, and he's going, it wasn't me. I promise it wasn't me. At the same time, his political enemies had also caught him on a technicality of procedure, which was illegal. And so they were coming at him on a legal front, and they're coming at him at from a PR angle, and the calls for him to resign are heavy. It's affecting his marriage, very much so. It's affecting his kids who are getting harassed at school because of what their dad supposedly did. And all of this is dragging out over the course of weeks. It's weighing heavy on him. And one day, it was the day that he had to offer a plea, whether or not he was guilty or not guilty for this charge of the technicality of the way that he had run this thing. And he texts me about an hour before he has to offer up his plea. He says, what should I do? I want to clear my name. I want to fight this, but my family just wants this to go away. What should I do? What do you tell somebody like that? This is their life. This is their career. This is their family. He's asking me, what should I do? So I referred him back to Wesley. I said, Wesley said, do no harm. I said, I don't know what to tell you to do, but what does it look like to cause the least amount of harm in this situation? To fight to clear your name or to give your family peace? He didn't answer my text. But an hour later, I got a news notification that he had resigned his position and pleaded no contest. He had determined that the pain that his family was going through was not worth the fight. Do no harm. But then stay in love with God. Friends, that is key. Everything depends on that. Because if you aren't connected to the love of God, you become bitter, you become selfish, and you become cynical. And when you fail to keep this connection, you find yourself in trouble really fast. This church member, he had failed to keep that connection to God. A lot of things in a short amount of time had happened in his life so that relationship, that deep and abiding love to have for God, that connection with God had faded away, and he had gotten himself into a lot of trouble that led to those accusations. He was innocent of a lot of stuff, but he was pushing some bounds he shouldn't have been pushing because he had fallen out of this state of taking care of himself spiritually and taking care of his family. But here's the thing, when everything falls apart, you have two options. You can stay broken. And friends, the people that we encounter going HEB, going to work, driving on the interstate, everybody we encounter is all dealing with states of brokenness. We are dealing with states of brokenness. We have an option. We can stay broken or we can embrace the grace of God. And when we embrace the grace of God, it leads us back into connection with him again. And everything changes. So these three things are known as the general rules of our church. So there is a method to our Methodism. But as we continue this Firebrand series, we're looking at this biblical imagery that as God's people, we are like brands that have been pulled out of the fire in order to be used for God's purpose. But to be used for God's purpose means we need to stay in love with God. After the Israelites left Egypt, they fled from slavery. They're heading to the promised land. Moses, who God has appointed as their leader, God calls Moses up onto a mountain to give him instructions to go then relay back to the people. And one of the many things that God told Moses to tell the people was this, Deuteronomy chapter 6. God says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all of your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." In Judaism, this is known as the Shema. And it is a prayer that is still utilized to this day. But God instructs the people to remember these commandments. The Lord, our God, the Lord is one. We're not polytheistic as was the world at the time that God was speaking this. We're monotheistic. We believe in one God. And we are to love him with our heart and soul and strength. And God gives this as a commandment because he knows that humanity is prone to wander. We often wander away from our love or devotion or worship of him. And wandering happens anytime we give our attention or adoration to anything but God. And that comes in all kinds of forms. It comes in the form of worshiping our careers, prioritizing our kids' schedule over everything else. Our technology can easily consume our time and attention. You fill in the blank, whatever it is. Life in general can steal our focus away from God. So God gives this commandment and instructs us not only to practice this, but to instruct our kids in this as well. And the command is this, to stay in love with God and to teach your kids to do the same. God literally says, write this stuff down. Make physical reminders of this commandment and put it in places you're going to see it, and you're going to see it on a daily basis, because you should take this seriously, because this connection, this relationship, it affects everything else in your life. Last week I asked you all if your family is made better because of your faith in Jesus, and there was stunned silence in the room. There was silence in the 9 o'clock service as well. It's a tough question to process, but truly, is your family better because of your love for God? Like, is this something that it translates from your heart to God's heart, through you to them? You know, we've started all of these memory verses. I hope you take those home. You actually commit your verse to memory, but you're instructing your kids and grandkids in this as well. Foster that as the environment of your household. Now, John Wesley had some practical ideas of what it means to stay in love with God. He called them the means of grace. And a means of grace are any outward sign or word or action that is ordained by God to help one access God's grace. And for Wesley, he boiled it down to these, although it's not limited to these, but these are certainly means in which we can find the grace of God when we go looking. Prayer, reading your Bible, worship, taking communion, fasting, committing acts of mercy, and being in accountable relationships. Let's just start with prayer and reading your Bible. Like, I know you know this, but these are like the most fundamental things you can do to stay connected with God and to foster a relationship with Jesus. I mean, it's really hard to have a relationship with Jesus if you don't talk to him, or you don't read what God has given us as his word. Like, it's really hard to be in a relationship when you kind of remove that as a part of your relationship. You know, relationships that you don't invest into, time into, are relationships that are ultimately going to fail. Without intentionality, I say this to every couple that I marry, without the intentionality there is the slow fade of one's heart. It's natural. Now, Wesley, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Wesley believed that we should ask each other questions to hold each other accountable into our walk with God. Some of the questions that he threw up there as ones that we should ask each other is, did the Bible live in me today? Did I give it time to speak to me every day? Am I enjoying prayer? These are questions that he meant for us as Methodists to ask one another each week, because it was to elicit accountability in this area of our lives, because staying in love with God starts with practicing these kind of fundamentals. And then there's worship. Worship is a tremendous means in which we get to stay connected with God. In fact, Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. When we gather for worship, the presence of Jesus meets us in this place. And friends, when Jesus shows up, anything is possible. That means the heaviness of your week that you brought into this space has the potential to fall away. It means your marriage, by gathering in this place and meeting with Jesus, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, your marriage has the potential to be strengthened. It means when you meet with Jesus in this place, you have the potential to be encouraged for your week. You have the potential to find inner healing in your life. So it begs the question, do you come expecting anything from Jesus? I hope you do. I hope you have high expectations for what Jesus needs to do, what you yearn for him to do in your life when you gather with other people and lift up his name. Because everything is possible when Jesus shows up. And when you sing, you unleash the gratitude of your heart to God. And when your heart is open to God, that's when he has the opportunity to change it. Then there's communion. And we do it at this service every single week. It's the act of meeting with the presence of Jesus in a physical way. Jesus says, take this bread and drink this wine and do this in remembrance of me, but he doesn't just put us through the motions. I had one professor who in seminary many years ago, he said that no one throws a feast in their own honor and then doesn't bother to show up. Like, we believe that Jesus meets us here. How? I don't know. It's a mystery. It's okay. But Jesus shows up and offers us grace, and grace is anything you need in the moment. So come to the table expecting Jesus to meet you in your needs. And then there's fasting. And let me tell you, I did not like this one for the longest time. I just kind of skipped over this as a means of grace. Like, that's nice for some people, until I started to do it. I started really to fast last year, and it's uncomfortable, but it changes your relationship with things that are uncomfortable. It changes your relationship to pain. All of a sudden, you start giving up these things with intentionality in your life, and you have to address things in your life that you have previously masked. And now you're raw. You feel those things. You're in tune with those things again. But God meets us in our lack. And when you give up something like food with the intentionality of pursuing God breaks through all the more. And God sustains you when you turn things over to him. Then there are acts of mercy, and that looks like doing all the good you can for other people. It could be showing up on the Wednesday night that the church volunteers at Helping Hands to give out food to those who need food in our county. It could be helping build a ramp at Fort Bend Ramps through our church. It could be helping a child or an adult, mentoring them at Fort Bend Hope. It could be volunteering in a ministry. It could be giving money to those who are in need. It's through our faith in action that we ourselves experience God's grace. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with somebody who volunteered for the first time, and they look at me afterwards. They're usually a little exhausted, but they've got a smile on their face. They're like, I think I enjoyed this more than the people I helped. Yeah, because there's grace received when there is grace given. And lastly, there are accountable relationships. You see, God uses people to speak words of encouragement in your life. In fact, that's often the way God's grace gets presented. God inspires somebody to offer you a word of encouragement, and you receive it as a means of grace. But that means you got to be in relationship with other people to receive it. Find a Sunday school class. I'm going to pick with you guys a little bit. Y'all are known for getting here 10 minutes late. Try getting here, 60 minutes early. Go to a Sunday school class. We got one for literally every set of ages, from kids to young adults to more seasoned adults, everything in between. Find a group to plug into. Get involved in a Bible study. Find people who are speaking God's grace into your life, and then make sure you're speaking God's grace into somebody else's. But back to instructing your family. I want you to understand this. You hold responsibility for your family's connection with God. You do. Now, it's not the primary responsibility, because the primary responsibility is still on the individual for their connection with God. But in your household, whatever form your household looks like, you have a responsibility to the spiritual care of everybody involved, whether you're a grandparent or parent, a child or a sibling. Like, we all got to be leaning in together into God. So the question is, do you do things like pray together? If you don't, start. It's always awkward the first time. Everybody kind of stands there and stares at each other. Well, somebody's got to start praying. Pray together as a family. Speak grace into each other's life and not just criticism. Forgive each other, like verbally, not just the understood. They acted a little bit warmer to me, so therefore they must forgive me. No, forgive one another. But let me ask you this. Is Jesus a person in your house, or is Jesus just something you go do a few times a month? Let that sink in for a minute. Is Jesus a person you actively invite into your household? You welcome him with open arms. You share in relationship with him. Or is Jesus just something you go out and do? You see, when you keep that connection with God and you foster that as the environment of your household, it absolutely changes the way you interact with all of these things. But something that Wesley didn't say, but I think deserves to be a part of this conversation as well, is the pace of our life. Author and pastor John Ortberg, he says this. He asks the question, what do you need to do to stay spiritually healthy? Then he answers, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life of our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. You must arrange your days so that you are experiencing deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God. Friends, the investment of time grows a relationship, but when you don't invest time, that relationship withers. And hurry is the process by which we don't have time. Hurry is in putting the minimal amount of effort to try to get a result back, and hurry will ruin your relationship with God. Therefore, Ortberg says we should arrange our days, take ownership of our day enough to arrange it in such a way that we gain contentment and joy in our relationship with God. Friends, I have read that countless times over the last few years. I have yet to master it. But every time I read it, it challenges me to make a shift, to change something about my schedule, the pace of my life, the focus of my day. And it changes my outlook in such a way that I am looking for contentment. I am looking for joy in my relationship with Jesus. And some days it's a struggle. And other days it's a delight. But to stay in love with God, it takes daily intentionality. And that intentionality starts with you. Some days are going to be better than others. Give yourself some grace. But take responsibility for your relationship with God and understand the role that you play in everybody else in your household's relationship with God. Now, I've said all throughout this sermon series, if there's something about your life you don't like, then change it. Take ownership of it. Do something about it. Don't play a victim. Do something about it. Well, it starts with 3 simple things. Do all the good you can. Do no harm. And stay in love with God through these means of grace. From that, you will experience a deep amount of change.